Hello and welcome to the Wolf Den podcast. I'm your host Nako, joined by my co-host Anitsu. This week's discussion will be finally discussing the idea of underrepresented decks in the meta, but we thought a fun way to actually include deck lists that people more or less actually care about anymore would be to start with BT8 deck lists. So we are going to be discussing BT8 underrepresented decks, which is somewhat a misnomer because we don't know what will be underrepresented yet necessarily, but it's basically just theory crafting and deck building, but not for what we predict to be the most played, most popular decks.
Yeah, and just as like a huge disclaimer, we don't actually know what the BT8 meta is going to be as of the recording of this, and it is all just our guess and hyperbole based on Japanese results and where we're seeing a lot of talk and buzz it being about. So what we think is going to be popular, just because what's popular also is going to have a higher representation in the meta as a whole. And obviously, results, which we don't have, is another huge factor in, well, what is actually going to define a meta.
So, for the purposes of this, what we're going to define as underrepresented is just going to be defined as like lower tiered decks that maybe don't or shouldn't be lower tiered, or at least could be higher tiered with enough play and enough focus. Um, and it's kind of all subjective as far as why these decks could or wouldn't receive play, but the for the purposes of this, we're going to be using DPP's tier list as a baseline, only because it's one of the few tier lists that exists at the moment, because it's so early on, and also because it's the only tier list that includes someone who's actually played BT8's tier list, at least as far as for the entirety of their own meta. Obviously, plenty of people in North America or Europe have played BT8, but they haven't competed in BT8. So it's kind of a different thing.
Yeah, and even though like DPP channel is Japanese based channel and the meta that he plays is Japanese meta. He's a pretty decent player from what I've seen of his videos, the few I actually watch. No offense to him. I just don't have time to watch a whole bunch of content creators. But and I think that he also talks with some North American players and he has a good perspective on the game as a whole.
Yeah. I know recently he's begun to make like English based content. Previously, he was just completely making just videos on his local meta and what decks he's played and what decks he's seen. And he's now, just because he has such a larger English audience, has decided to start adapting his content towards the English meta audience. But using his English BT8 tier list, so he's made this tier list and posted it on his YouTube channel. And I think he like tweeted out some deck lists from this as like what he considers to be like the shell of each of these decks, and why they are there on this tier list. So this is with the restrictions and bannings in mind, as well as what he considers to be decks that will be popular in North America, but again, technically from an outside perspective.
Yep. So with that, we're going to be basically going from the bottom up because that's where the more underrepresented decks are and what we kind of want to highlight and focus on, like how could these decks be performing and what's making them good, what's making them not good, so on and so forth.
So I'll include, I guess we'll include a link to his tier list in the description below. I don't want to just throw it up on screen and steal his content because that doesn't really feel fair to him. But I'm going to be looking at it this whole time, at least referencing it fairly frequently. Um, so the first thing I wanted to start with Zenitsu as far as this tier list is, I know we kind of define underrepresented as B and below. I don't really necessarily want to start from the bottom up because a lot of these decks he included here I just don't care, and I don't think anyone cares. Like, there's a difference between underrepresented and included for the sake of not pissing off that one person that cares. Like Creepymon, I don't think anyone's gonna play Creepymon. Or
Okay, so I think Creepymon is a little bit like, here's my perspective on
there's
Creepymon. He is
underrepresented, and then there's like try finding one person out of 512 that's playing it. That's not underrepresented. That's bad.
well, I mean, so Creepymon I think is a pretty I hate using the word interesting because I use that a lot, but he is a pretty fascinating card in which he is basically the setup for all Demon Lords. Like that seems to be his direction. He is the setup for them all. So you could make a uh Demon Lord based deck, seven great Demon Lord more specifically, I guess. But you could make a Demon Lord based deck with Creepymon, and that could be pretty interesting. And you could, dang it, you could what I've seen was Creepymon combos, which is basically just doing the exact same thing that Lilithmon is doing, except with Creepymon instead, where you're just trying to res out level fives and then use Cerberusmon to like use werewolf mode to gain 9 memory to do a whole bunch of shenanigans, and then you use Wart. So it is basically just Lilithmon 2.0. So like there is a lot that Creepymon can do. It's just like you said, I don't think anyone is going to care, on top of the fact that he's a secret in the set. So like he's going to be a little bit harder than the average card to get to be able to play. And I don't think that deck is nearly as good as what Lilithmon is. If so, it's basically on par with what Lilithmon is doing. Um and I just think that Lilithmon, because of the Eismon hit, the Mega Digimon Fusion hit, I think Lilithmon is actually going to be taking down a huge notch in terms of its popularity, just because it's not going to be the same thing that people were used to and enjoyed about the deck.
So, Lilithmon is included here at C tier, which would make it underrepresented slash lower tiered. Um, I guess I want to preface. I think underrepresented is things that aren't seeing as much play that could be better. So I'm just kind of gonna ignore here all the decks that I think are exactly where they belong or worse. And I think that starts with Lilithmon. Like obviously Lilithmon will see play. I just think that now finally without the Eismon package, without MDF, you're running out of reasons to play it, and the people that are good at it and the people that care about it will probably find a reason to play it, but that's about it. And as far as that's concerned, I wouldn't necessarily I've never been recommending people play it because of it. So now whatever Frankenstein deck that they come up with, I'm double not recommending people play. So, um I'm just going to
I mean, I
scroll
think,
along. Okay, go ahead.
yeah. Oh, I think Lilithmon is in an adapt or die situation where if it doesn't have something good, basically now, it is going to be dead as a deck as a whole, which is going to be like both a good thing and a bad thing, because it's like, okay, cool. Lilithmon was probably this really stupid, dumb deck to begin with. Um, but, oh,
um
God, yeah, Lilithmon was just this stupid, dumb abomination of a deck to begin with, but that's like leaning into purple strengths in terms of deck building. And I think like Creepymon combo slash Lilith Loop or whatever you choose to do next with it is going to be um, the make or break point for the deck as a whole.
um yeah, like I'm probably just going to skip a decent amount of these as they aren't
Oh,
worth
you could
mentioning.
100% skip Eosmon. I've
No,
tested Black
like
Eosmon. It is not worth it.
I'm skipping like 80% of these because I want to include decks that A I think are actually underrepresented. B that someone or at least like more I want more visibility to. So if there's a deck that I'm not passionate about, I don't really feel as though I want to dedicate time to it. But
Well, I mean,
um
like some of these are kind of like awkward inclusions where it's just like, are you really going to be playing Black Royal Knights like almost a updated BT6 version in BT8? Like the Black still has this problem where it doesn't get that many good generic tools for it to use, so it's like the deck really didn't change a whole lot.
half of these like lists or like actually probably half of these lists if not more I feel are inclusion for the sake of uh, uh, appealing to the most people possible because a lot of these lists are decks that I would potentially see at locals by people that play the game extremely casually. Like I played Black Rail Knights in BT6 and now it's BT8 and I'm just adding cards as they come out. And that's fine, I guess, like for someone who casually follows a card game to just update whatever deck you're currently playing and not wholesale change it out every format like most people have been with Digimon. But at that point you're not competitive. Purely. You're not seeing any sort of and for our purposes competitively minded focus, it's not really worth mentioning.
Well, I mean, you do have some of those decks that just last for a while, like Lilith Loop lasted for quite a while, and this is probably her big last hurrah before people just have to accept the fact that she's just not what she used to be, and she can't do what she used to do.
I mean, yeah. But so, I've never really recommended people play Lilith because of its difficulty and intricacies, and now it's worse. And every other deck is getting better, or at least more consistent. So, no Lilith Loop. No Creepy Mon. The first deck here. So I was gonna discuss the actual listing and like moving things around here. So like I know something that is technically B tier on this is Black War Greymon, and I think that's accurate. But I don't think it's going to be underrepresented. If anything, I think Black War Greymon is going to be overrepresented due to its popularity in North America, especially just looking at TCG Player and like what cards people are buying right now. Like it's almost exclusively um, Imperial Dramon support, Mastamon support, Black X Antibody support, but like fourth in popularity, I want to say, is Black War Greymon support. People really like that deck. I like that deck.
I think just because Black War Greymon slash Greymon Tribal as a whole has a lot of flexibility and different ways you could approach the deck. You could approach it mid range, you could approach it aggro, you could approach it control, and just having that plethora of tools just makes it a really fun deck to not only build but to play. And you could customize it to your own likings, which is what's pushing it into that like slightly higher representation in terms of like what people enjoy out of Digimon.
It's so interesting. Like what decks are here and what decks aren't here. So like all of the hybrids are here, including blue hybrid, but with the face of the blue hybrid being Magna Garurumon, which it just isn't. This is just a very like I guess Japanese-minded blue hybrid list because nobody ran Magna by the end of it. Um,
Well, I think Blue Hybrids is still good. I think Blue Hybrids is going to go hugely down in popularity just because, well, obviously, new set comes out, people want new tools, but I think Blue Hybrids wasn't exactly the deck a lot of people wanted. Like, I'm a blue player and I like the aggression. Blue Hybrids was not a very aggressive deck. I'm sorry, it wasn't. You literally just sit there playing Tamers and then line up a big turn where you just go sideways as safely as you possibly can. And it was, I don't want to say it was boring. Some of the matches were really intricate and hard to decide on how to aggress, but it was not like it wasn't just your stereotypical aggro deck like Rookie Rush, like what Armor Rush is going to be.
so um, the first deck that I see here that I think will actually should see play, won't necessarily see as much play. I guess we'll see. Was a deck that I was very interested in, at least envious of, back in BT 5, leaning into BT 6 when security control was kind of a big issue. And it was an up and coming deck, and it was very prevalent. Um, and that's Green Shivaman. So I guess that's the first deck I'd actually like to talk about.
Green Shivaman is, I think, a lot better of a deck than people give it credit for. Um, it has two different ways that you could approach the deck. Technically, three. No one's going to play the Insectoid route just because Insectoids the synergy's not there. You could do it, sure, but I wouldn't recommend it. But Shivaman is mostly going to be included in either green hybrids as just a card, because it's a good card. It's an insectoid, so Rhino can use it relatively easily. Then it'll be suspended when you digivolve up into it, which is what Shivamon kind of wants. But I think Shivamon plays really nicely like what old Sarismon did, where it's just using a whole bunch of really good Digisorption cards to try to go up the stage really fast, have your Digimon be suspended, and then just shutting out the opponent's options and burning them every
Hmm.
single turn that Shivamon's out is absolutely insane. Especially if you could build a really good Shivamon, then that deck can just sit there and just stall, not really stall out the game, but just like make it so you can't really get rid of Shivamon. And that's something Green hasn't really done before, which makes it a really fun and interesting deck.
Yeah, Green has kind of like been forced to or been sidelined to be this weird midpoint between aggression and control. Like its control is aggression. Like you're either uh, tapping down your opponent's Digimon and then usually swinging over them, either with or without piercing, and then gaining some benefit to it, even reaching all the way back to. Um, I only have the insectoids pull up. I don't know if it was one. The the starter deck Mega Kabuterimon inheritable. When it deletes an opponent's Digimon in battle and survives, trash the top card of your opponent's security. That as a um, green like trample mechanics, so to speak, is I think really good place and like a really good direction for the deck to go in. And if you do start with your green hybrid base, I guess that's a really easy way to play the deck. I don't necessarily know if it's the best way, but I also don't know what else you'd play because I know green struggles. Green, I guess, struggles at the low end now because we value things differently. But earlier
Well,
on, green had like the strongest base, the most efficient base basically of any color.
yeah, so the way you play like a true Shivaman deck, just for doing what Shivaman wants to do, you are going to just use the Pulsemon line for green. So Pulsemon will just increase its DP. Then you'll also have Exermon, which will also increase its DP. You have Namakemon to just suspend itself to act as a solid draw engine. Um, then you have Pistmon as a good Digisorption card that also will increase its DP. So like the whole idea is you're just building the stack as quickly as you possibly can, then have other Digimon on the field to increase its DP to make it harder to deal with. So you have to deal with the other Digimon first, which is not taking care of the problem. So when Shivamon unsuspends, there goes the burn. Then you have the option card to suspend the opponent's Digimon down and then basically attack into it. Um, so that way uh, it stun locks the Digimon and it can also stun lock Tamers. So like I think it's a lot better of a deck as Shivamon than a splasher support in other cards because like you could also play it in like Jagamon High Roll, but like I don't think that deck is really that great. Then you have Argemon, level 5 is still stupid. You get Kogamon. Like I am just kind of going over the whole list, but like there is a lot of different cards and a lot of different ways you could approach it. I think Shivamon really shines from actually not hitting the security. That's what Shivamon wants to do is it never wants to actually hit the security. It wants to figure out ways to burn the opponent's security.
That's I guess exactly what I was leaning into as far as like a real control deck because a control deck in my mind is a deck that wins by manipulating the opponent and depriving them of resources and removing their stuff. But yellow or hybrid slash security control never really like scratched that itch for me, only because it didn't do anything. Like it just kind of just
Well,
loaded the shotgun that is security and then waited for the opponent to pull the trigger, whereas at least this deck has its own trigger.
Well, the big problem with green was it was just really one dimensional. It was let me get a Digimon out, cool. Let me quickly evolve past yours, suspend it, and then beat it up, and then now we're getting the ball rolling.
Hmm.
Shivamon is a lot more it's less reliant on the opponent actually doing something, and you're just literally playing to its own game plan. And I think that's the big difference between Shivamon versus other green decks is like it's literally waiting for the opponent to do something, and Shivamon is the first green deck where it actually isn't really waiting.
Hmm.
I guess you could kind of say green hybrids wasn't really waiting. You just slam down tamers, and then you kind of are just waiting, but you're still advancing your game state. But Shivamon takes it to a different level.
Well, I think you have to like look at the colors as their um, ends allow for. So green hybrid isn't filling the same niche that, like you mentioned, green Sarismon occupied way back. It's just the spiritual successor to like um, green OTK without being an OTK. It was the
It's not that
aggression.
fast.
Well, it doesn't need to be. It's still more
Yeah.
aggressively minded. It's the aggro of green. Even it's not necessarily an aggro deck, but it's as aggro as green gets without being like Rookie Rush.
I could see that.
So you're just kind of looking at two different archetypes almost. You have your green aggro is your green hybrid, your green OTK, stuff like that.
Classic green beat 'em up, yeah.
And then you have your other end of it being now we have like green Shivaman and Shivaman control its ability to exactly do that. It controls and um using its efficiencies, using the fact that you can just make a giant Shivamon that just sits there and slowly burns away at your opponent. That's exactly what a control deck in my mind does. Is uh it controls the board, it deprives them of resources, and then actually ends the game. You know.
Well, the thing with Shivamon is the reason why it wants to run a lot of Digisorptions is to go up into multiple Shivamons as quickly as you possibly can to passively burn, and for using your other Shivamons as Digisorption fodder. So
Mhm.
like that is the end goal of Shivamon, is just getting Shivamon out, being extremely obnoxious with it, and then just trying to get into other Shivamon ASAP.
Yeah, I guess the ideal turn being a turn where you already have a Shivamon, and then you Digivolve for 0 into a Blossom or Argo level 5, and then Digivolve for 4 into Shivamon, I guess tapping the other um, Shivamon previously. But um,
Yeah,
now,
like you don't like I learned really quickly you don't really want to swing that often with Shivamon, and if
no.
you do, it has to be at the other opponent's Digimon without piercing. Because if you accidentally trigger an option in the opponent's security, because that's the only time that they can do it while a Shivamon and all of your other Digimon are suspended, you're in a really bad position then.
So the second half of this, the relevant portion to anyone actually that cares about Shivamon, but we can talk it up all day. What does it do against the decks that it's going to see? Because one of the biggest strengths of underrepresented decks, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about them, is that it they can chip away wins against the tier 1 decks. Diaboramon against Yellow Hybrid and BT7 was my, pet deck, but um the idea that so what does Shivamon's matchup look like against Blue Green Imperial?
So blue green imperial, you literally just try to play the classic green beat up. You could be more aggressive into the opponent's Digimon, so that way you aren't actually trying to attack their security. Just because imperial doesn't really have that many high level Digimon that you're playing with, and they don't have that much removal. Like outside of the option that comes in the starter deck, like you're not really playing much else past that in terms of getting rid of that Shivamon. And even then, when Shivamon is suspended, um, they won't even be able to do it. So they actually can't get rid of your Shivamon.
It should be
And
big
then
enough, right? With enough inheritables, it shouldn't be swing overable.
um as long as you have one other Digimon, then yeah, it's like not swing overable for Imperial unless they're running a level 7, which most Imperialists I have seen
Yeah, they
don't
run
really do
Paladin.
that.
They run Paladin mode.
No, they don't.
Oh wow, that's crazy. They should.
I think like they'll sometimes also consider running fighter mode. Um,
I see fighter
but
mode being
even
the
then,
face of the deck. Actually, not gonna lie. Most lists
no,
run more
it's a
fighters than
hardcore.
dragons.
No, it's a hardcore Jagras deck. Like Imperial is just a you just want to Jagras as quickly as you possibly can, so that way you could apply lots of pressure. Like a good Imperial turn could very easily combo out for like 4 to 5 damage in a single turn. Like it's
Yeah,
actually that crazy.
I guess the idea being that you want to see one dragon mode only, whereas you want to see like most ratios I see
Well,
are either
Paladin
2 and 2.
and Fighter aren't doing anything for the deck. It really isn't. Like you're trying to rely solely on your Jagresses to do a lot of work, and then you go into Dragon mode to split apart your Jagras to re-Jagras again to start swinging again. Like that is what the deck is at its core.
Yeah, I don't know. We're not
So the
talking
fact that
about the,
you'll
the
just
other
have
deck
yeah,
right
so
now.
like with Shivamon, The fact that you'll just have a Digimon that they just can't kill means
They'll have to
that
go
they
around
really
it.
have to, yeah, they'll have to go around it. Unfortunately, the deck doesn't run any blockers, but like your options are still live, so you could try to suspend the opponent's Digimon to take their attacks away from cards in your security, and you could still line up different lines of play to try to beat the opponent's Digimon up. And you could still go up the stages relatively quickly. So that's kind of what that matchup looks like, where you just need to get into Shivamon and then just sit on Shivamon for the whole game. Against Mastimon, that's a little bit harder, but if you can turn at least Mastimon's options off, then it's going to be
Mm.
harder for Mastimon to do stuff, especially since Mastimon's going to give you lots of memory, and Green loves having lots of memory. They're just like, okay, let me go all the way up the chain for like 2 memory.
Yeah.
Um, so that's like giving Green lots of memory is like what Green wants, and Mastimon doesn't have a good way to prevent them from getting a lot of memory
And
and using
green
it efficiently.
green does have a memory blocker in the form of Terriermon. Um, I know we've mentioned that level 3 Floodgate rookies are fairly easy to get rid of sometimes, but it's at least a consideration. Loop isn't as prevalent or won't be as prevalent as it used to be.
You
So,
still have to stop memory manipulating shenanigans. Like it's
well,
the amount of memory certain decks can gain and how they can manipulate it. You still really want to shut it out as much as you can.
I wasn't referencing like the fact that like Loop gets a bunch of memory. I mean, Loop just kills them passively. That's what I meant because I never felt as though my memory blocking rookies ever did anything against Loop because Lilith Mom's inheritable or the Lady Devi inheritable always would just kill the level 3 whenever you played an option card, which just
See, I want to make the joke of what Lady Devi inheritable, but I know Mastimon's going to play it. But like that's the strength of Shivamon is turning off the options. So
mhm,
like they won't have an effective or efficient way of killing any of your Digimon because Shivamon will take away their ability to play options. So
mhm.
they have to attack into them, and well, now they're trying to spend extra time and resources that they shouldn't be spending on trying to deal with your small Digimon, and then Shivamon's going to clean up the clock.
Do you ever run Kogamon? I think you run Kogamon. Maybe
No,
not
you
like a
run
lot of
Kogamon.
them.
No, you run Kogamon. Kogamon's a 4 of. You need the retaliation
Yeah,
to
because
de-incentivize the opponent from
if you're gonna
swinging
sit
into
there,
him.
if you're gonna sit there suspended all the time, you probably also want to have retaliation.
Yes. Because if they ever get to a point where their Digimon is just magically bigger than your Shivamon, like the retaliation will just say, "Okay, I don't care. Like, go ahead, delete me."
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's about it. Like, um, I think the deck's good. I don't know if people are gonna play it. I know yellow or green hybrid wasn't necessarily that popular. It got a lot of hype early on, and I think when it failed to see success, or I guess maybe when it struggled against blue hybrid more, people started to switch off of it. But um, I think technically green gotch is on this list, but I don't feel like
Yeah,
it's worth
Green
mentioning.
Gotcha's on the list. I mean, Green Gotcha is just going to use Shivamon. Like, it's just using the same cards that Shivamon's going to be using anyway.
Just different
It's just
base,
using,
or
yeah,
just
it's
a
just
different level 5
it's
spread.
a different engine. Yeah, it's a different engine to go up. It's just like, okay, let me swing with Jagamon, consistently go into Shivamon or Nidhoggmon, and then like what?
Mm.
You're doing the same thing that Shivamon's doing, just differently. At least like with green hybrids, I think green hybrids is still a pretty decent deck. Um, just hybrids as a general isn't gonna die. Um, just because they're still really, really good. And well, Shivamon could also now go into green hybrids instead of forcibly running what's its face? Ancient Troymon.
Yeah.
So
So,
green's got a lot of work with.
which deck do you want to mention next? Because I guess I picked first. So,
As much as I hate yellow, I kind of want to talk about Lord Nightmon just because I think Chimeramon makes that deck way more viable, especially the yellow purple splash that you could already have wanted to do anyway. Um, and you could even start thinking about splashing other colors too. So like you could even go red yellow if you really wanted to. Just because it's Lord Nightmon just playing Nightmon using Sylphimon to like delete the like you could pace your abilities to have absolutely insane levels of control and then you're already playing into two colors, so you could easily line up Jogger's plays, especially with Lord Nightmon being able to play Gladymon for free. That's a level 4 that you could then just play another level 4 and then Jogress right away with. Like, Lord Nightmon is definitely a deck that shouldn't be slept on. I think it is just worse than Jesmon still, but like it's still very playable just because the card is still very strong.
So there's a lot to unpack there. I have a lot of things. You said a lot. So I guess starting off, Lord Nightmon, Jogress. I've heard the concept thrown around. I've seen lists, but my question is, we didn't like Gladymon before. Is Jogress good enough? Because I think I want to say I ran one Gladymon, if not zero Gladymon by the end of BT5. Like, it was the one card in the engine that, and I ran few Kodamon even. I looked at it was like, I don't need this. I don't care.
I think with Gladymon, even though he is not the best, you still want to use Nightmon at least. Yeah, you still want to use Nightmon, just because his level of control is still good, and Gladymon can help fish out Nightmon. It can help fish out Lord Nightmon. Um, you do have some interesting yellow purple interactions with your security, so you could use it in combination with Kari if you really wanted to go with that yellow purple splash. Like, it's not an amazing card, but like yellow still kind of just doesn't really have anything else better. Especially since blockers are kind of like phased out. It's like, okay, I'm not using 4 Unimon anymore, so they might as well be Gladymon to make Jagras plays a little bit easier. And like anything that can spawn a level 4 is like, especially for free, is in my eyes really really good because Chimeramon is just that good of a card to use to line up for easy Jogresses.
I mean, Yellow hasn't been super strong out like in the meta as far as like actual yellow Digimon. It's just been the yellow hybrid stuff. So a lot of the packages and Digimon haven't seen a whole lot of play, but I think Yellow's gotten a handful of very strong niche playable cards. I guess most of them being the like cares about 3 security package in all of them, like Bulkmon, Mimicmon. So
Uh, Mimicmon is so gross in Jagras deck just
that's what I
because it's one
mean.
of the easiest. Yeah, it's one of the easiest level 4s you could possibly think about running. So like I think Lord Nightmon could very easily run like uh Teruimon, Mimicmon, and Gladymon
Pedomon?
as a solid level 4 lineup.
Do we ever care? Like, so you care about Terurimon for the 1 cost.
I mean, Terurimon could it is a flex spot in my eyes. Like the one cost Evo in case you like have to like play a level 3 could still just help.
Hmm.
That's my only thought process on like Terurimon still being good. Plus you want to try to get up into or not Mastimon, Lord Nightmon as fast as you can, and that card still just helps. Like it's not ideal, but it's not awful. Because Lord Nightmon is definitely a really interesting control deck. Um well actually it's more of like a mid-range deck in actually.
It is, yeah, it's a mid-range deck with controlling elements. It leans more towards control, but it means to aggress with its control.
Right, and Chimeramon is just absolutely redonkulously stupid of a card. That card is so good. It makes so many decks extra viable. And
Hmm.
Lord Nightmon is just one of those decks that could really take advantage of Chimeramon.
So I don't know if there is one. I'm scanning here. One of the big payouts of Chimeramon to me is that you can tuck a level 5, theoretically trading Chimeramon for that inheritable of the level 5 that you don't have because you Jogressed instead. So what level 5? Would it just be Angelwamon? Do we care about
Uh I
Angelwamon anymore?
I don't think we do. Like we don't care about the tucking. We just care about the extra like the usability on the extra bodies we're creating.
Do we? So You mentioned the purple package a couple times. What does that mean to you? What do you see as a purple package in a Lord Nightmon deck? Because I know what you mean by that, but like put some, pieces on the table here.
So it's kind of acting similar to Rasenman, where it's a very light splash of purple, um, just to be able to utilize some purple options. So you could use Kari, from BTO4
The
to
tamer,
interact
okay.
with, yeah, to just have that purple source for your two color options for purple and yellow. And that's like as deep as Lord Nightmon will generally go. Although Lord Nightmon does want to interact with Lucimon and Lucimon Chaos Mode. So like there's just a lot of experimentation that could be done with Lord Nightmon based on its ability to just play Digimon for free. Well,
Hmm.
not all Digimon, obviously, but like just getting getting free bodies is absolutely insane.
Yeah, I gotta go back. I think it was level fours I was looking at.
Because you could still
Um,
use like certain two color Digimon, and so like if you wanted to go evolution route, you could go yellow purple or yellow red and try to incorporate a little bit of that Mastimon spice
hmm.
into your Lord Nightmon. I don't think the deck exactly needs that, but it's there. It's possible. Just because you want to Jagras off of your level fours, and you could even line up Mastimon Jagrases if you really wanted to, just because you could spawn a free level five. I think that's a little bit too much, but it's possible.
Yeah, it's a little heavy-handed. Um, Especially because the purples want to be digivolved, not played. Um, as far to my knowledge, I don't think there's any level 5 that has any sort of like relevant on-play effect besides like Chimeramon.
No,
Um,
but Lord Nightmon, you don't necessarily care about your inheritables that much anyway, just because Lord Nightmon's abilities are just too good as is.
mhm.
And Yellow has some like really god awful inheritables that like just don't matter
It has
or
some
are too
relevant ones.
specific. Yeah, there's some relevant ones, but like they're too specific to really like want to say, "Hey, I'm this card is going to be 100% usable 100% of the time." It's like, "No, this card's going to be about 70% usable like 50% of the time." Like they're not all there, and all of the abilities aren't hyper consistent, which is why Lord Nightmon is just absolutely insane of a level 6, because its abilities are just that good. It doesn't care about having extra abilities. It's nice, it doesn't need it.
What would you put as the actual like alternative mega in the deck? Because I know back in the day, even like people were fairly split. People started out very DP minus version, and they transitioned more so into like a Mastamon, at least a Mastamon slash Angemon hybrid. Like it wasn't, they weren't all one or the other. It was usually a combination of the two as the off mega. So what would your off
Yeah,
mega be in a BT8 Lord Nightmon deck? A Fanyamon fall down mode?
there's a lot that you could do just because like there's none that are specifically insane. It's like all of them are just pretty decent. So like Ophanimon Fall Down mode is a really good one. Um I would still think using like Yellow Royal Knights could be pretty good if you're going like a Joggers route. Just because you are going to be wanting to run Gladimon
Mm.
already.
Mhm.
Um you could use Junomon from the starter deck just because it's another generically decent card. Like, it doesn't really need a supporting mega, but like, there's a lot of different options for you if you want to use one.
Yeah, I think if I just eyeballing stuff here, a Fanny Fall down mode just looks like a really good card.
No,
And
that card's
how
also insane.
generally playable it is, and it does kind of fit in the theme of the deck anyway because um when digivolving, if a purple card's in its sources, there won't necessarily be, but there doesn't mean there won't be. I don't know if you would run potentially like the BT8 purple yellow black Gatomon or
I mean, you could easily just run that
other
card too.
other things like there are other purple cards you could run to, but even if you just digivolve for 4, recover 1, a deck that cares about control and aggression with a small recovery package has always been a good staple in a Lord Nightmon deck, from Lucamon and Lucamon Chaos Mode. And then the on deletion being fantastic, playing a purple or yellow level 4 lower either gets you a Bushy or a Black Atomon if you want to use it for aggro.
Yeah, like there's still just a lot of things that Fall Dynamo can do depending on how you build the deck. And like that's the magic of these types of like underrepresented decks is like there's so many things that you could do that they're not exactly super linear. Like you look at Imperial Jamon and for the most part he's pretty much built one way. You're going to be running all of the VMons that you can, like the good ones. Then you're going to be running a very stereotypical level 4 package and then your level fives are just going to be your Jogresses, and then you're going to have Imperial Dramon as your big boss for the finish, and then just a well-rounded option package. So like, there's not really a whole lot of variance in that, and Mastimon's kind of in that same boat where it's just like you have your most optimal cards, which everyone's going to run. You have your optimal way of playing it, which is just what everyone's going to run, and they're kind of homogenous in that aspect. So a lot of these like lower tier decks actually have more flexibility than the topper tier ones, but the topper tier ones are obviously good for a very specific reason.
Um, yeah, I guess that's really the point of this. I know we mentioned it before. I know I've said it before already, but just the idea that um, you can take these quote unquote B tier decks, C tier even, depending on who you ask, and knowing knowing the deck and knowing what you're going to go up against, um, especially if you're good at it and you care about it, because the the easiest trap for players to fall into is the idea that you're in a tournament and your opponent hatches an egg and it's like they see a green egg and then you digivolve into a Terriermon and then you digivolve into a you know Kabuterimon in past turn and you've given them one like okay now this person playing green something and just based on that lineup alone you're like they're not playing a tier 1 deck and you feel better about yourself sitting at the other end of the table. I know I've done it a bunch and usually that false sense of security is, the A of oh thank God I'm not playing against Armor Rush slash Imperial Jogress slash Mastamon Jogress. I can calm down a little bit as far as like how hard this matchup is going to be. But also, usually what comes with that is people that play lower tiered decks are playing them because they don't know they're lower tiered necessarily, because or like they're choosing to play less competitive decks due to their favoritism of I really like Jagamon, and like that's great. I'll see
Also
you
the
at table
surprise
65.
also the surprise factor can still take people like and you could still do relatively well with it. It's just like I could be saying I'm running a Jagamon deck, but what does your level 6 lineup look like? Like that's the big thing is like what does the deck actually look like? And that's something a lot of people just don't really know. Like I was just as an example, back in BT7, I was playing against GFG Tyler and he was playing blue green hybrids where it was mostly green hybrids with the blue hybrid like the blue package and blue good cards. And then all of a sudden, I'm feeling very confident, very comfortable in the matchup. And then he just slams down an Argemon level 5 or Argemon level 6
Mm,
from BT5 out of nowhere,
yeah.
stuns all of my tamers and takes my lethal away. And I was just like, excuse me, you did what now?
Hmm.
So not only was I not really guessing on what blue options he was running to warrant splashing blue in, outside of just the stupidness of Madoki and Siako, but he was also running offbeat megas, and that surprise factor won him the game. He completely outplayed me because he knew what his deck was doing. I didn't know what his deck was doing.
Well, the final point that I didn't get to, the most important point was there are a lot of people that play pet decks because they're pet decks. It's another thing to play a pet deck with a competitive reason. And that's I guess what we're aiming to do and showcase here is there are competitive reasons to play these decks beyond I like Jagamon slash whatever Digimon you like. A lot of people will be playing Black or Greymon due to the popularity of the Agumon line, the Greymon line, and how cool the cards are. Um, but they're also really strong. They're genuinely strong, and I don't necessarily see that deck as underrepresented. I think it'll be like a low, like 1.5 tier 2 deck, unfortunately, until it gets the other half of its support in BT9. But um, I guess an easy pivot point just being like the level 5 BT8 Metal Greymon. I think we've mentioned in previous episodes how strong of an individual card that is for a bunch of decks, and how that card alone, I think, kind of redefines um, EX1. Crap, what's it called?
Machine Germon.
Yeah, Machine Dramon. I still have my list, and it's one of the few decks that um I I made in EX1. It's the only list I made in EX1 new instead of updating an old list, and it's a deck that I've just been updating as it comes along. As of BT7, we received Chaos Dramon. I made it a um Chaos Dramon slash Tidal Wave um deck, splashing in the blue low end, and now with the additional support in BT8, it just gets better. It does the same thing but better, except in a world where um, blue hybrid isn't there to ruin your day.
And I think like there's just a lot of other inheritable abilities. Like you could really tech the matchup to be what you need it to be. And the overall increase in consistency in two colors also makes it easier to want to try to digivolve up to your level fives, where before you kind of just really didn't want to do that. So there's still just a lot of extra flexibility that BT8 adds, even to something as niche as Machine Dramon. And Machine Dramon not being able to die for the most part still is insane. The only thing that really ruins it, which is like what puts it in lower tiers, is it still could be bounced and chaos degradation or
Hmm. Yeah, it
degradation.
can still get put in
Um,
security.
yeah, it has there's a new form of removal to just be thrown into your security and then deleted off the top. So like there's still ways to get around it, which is what makes it lower tier, but like against a lot of other decks that aren't interacting with bounce effects or just literally hard putting them into the security, he's still going to be a very hard Digimon for a lot of decks to handle. And that could still take you relatively far in events.
So I didn't necessarily want to bring it up earlier because I don't think it's as good a deck, but um, Machine Dramon definitely has a place. Um, I think the biggest weakness Machine Dramon has isn't necessarily its weakness to certain removals. I think it's that people are aware of its specific weakness to removals. So it's kind of a crapshoot, and you have to just hope you're not going up against a deck that plays Chaos Degradation. So if you see blue green, you're potentially in a better spot. Or if you see Armor Rush, you're in a better spot, as opposed to seeing anything yellow purple.
I would definitely agree with that because like at least against the blue matchups or like the bounce removals, you could still tech in Breath of the Gods to not only act as an insane card to stop the opponent's aggression full halt. So like if they're trying to line up their big like Jagras power push turn and you only can do so much to stop it, or your Imperial Dramon or not Imperial Dramon, your Machine Dramon doesn't have blocker or whatever. That card could just full halt all of their plays. Like no joke, it's insane. And then it also can stop the opponent's bounce effects, which is a huge weakness to Machine Dramon. Is just he's weak against bounce. So like there are ways you could tech the deck to better fit that matchup at least. The purple matchup, you just have to not see that card. That's your only hope. You just have to not see that card.
Yeah, it's it's a pretty shitty place to be in for an underrepresented deck, and it's I guess at the point where I wouldn't necessarily recommend playing Machine Dramon unless you're really hoping to miss that matchup. Um, it'd be one of it's a wait and see deck definitely for me. Um, like I said, I already have it built. It just takes a couple cards to upgrade from BT7 to BT8. The real factor being get an early read on the meta and then pin how likely it is you actually see a yellow hybrid or a yellow purple Mastamon Jogress. Um, and then take it from there because the deck does have a fairly linear line of play, and its new options are strong. I guess again, the BT8 Metal Greymon being one of the strongest, because if you're going up against something like Blue Green Imperial Jogris, there's a decent chance you're going to have blocker, reboot, piercing, and unsuspend when you delete an opponent's Digimon. So, or I guess not the that's the Black War Greymon ability. I'm sorry, the attacking unsuspended Digimon. But that's still ridiculous. Also, just in general, like de-digivolving is going to be fairly relevant in this meta. I know I've had some funny plays where I've de-digivolved Chimeramon and then destroyed the giant stack underneath it with a, you know, Metal Greymon just deleting a 3k or less body because of the level 4 that was underneath Chimeramon, at least as it's the highest source.
Yeah, I mean, it'll, and that's kind of why like you shouldn't sleep on certain decks and certain cards cuz like literally sometimes one card could change an entire deck's dynamic. Granted, that card's still like really good. Don't get me wrong. For Machine Dramon as a whole, just because it's two colors, you could use it very easily. It has a good ability that's directly interacting with machines. Um, and now you have this like option where you could choose to want to try to go up the stages, or you could just try to hard slam Machine Dramon and try to tidal wave again. So like there still is multiple different ways that you could build some of these decks. Like another deck that is on this list that is relatively slept on is going to be the Skull Knight deck, just to try to pivot to something else. Skull Knightmon, even though he doesn't have his full wave of support, he still has lots of really good plays because again, Chimeramon is just that stupid of a card, and it just lines up easy joggers plays on top of having a very hard Digimon to get rid of because of how the Skull Knight stuff wants to work. I don't think it's going to be as strong as some of the other decks we were already talking about. But in terms of like a good like classic aggro deck with a hard to kill Digimon, um, that is definitely looking to be a pretty spicy deck.
I'm definitely not as well read on the Skull Knight deck. Um, I've seen lists floating around of it kind of replacing D Brigade a little bit, or in like conjunction with D Brigade, but um, it still gets support. So it's a little unfair sometimes to say like it doesn't have its full support because we don't know when it's full support. Like I think it's still technically getting support as a BT10. So who the
So
hell
what I
knows?
defined, yeah, what I defined as full support is the fact that the card says Bagramon and we don't have a Bagramon in the game. So to me, it obviously means that it doesn't have the one thing it was trying to interact with. And obviously, knowing ahead BT10, we're probably going to be getting a Bagramon. And we definitely know that we have more Skull Knight support. Like, it really is going to flesh out the deck, but like in terms of what it wanted to do as of right now, it screams that it needs a Bagramon or wants to be played with a Bagramon, and we just don't have that. That's what I mean by like we don't have its full support. Like it doesn't need the BT10 cards. Don't get me wrong, the BT10 cards are absolutely fantastic, but that's too far ahead. It's the fact that we don't have that Bagramon is like, oh, it doesn't have the piece that it's clearly saying that it's missing.
Yeah, that's fair. Um, but I guess what I don't think it needs it. I mean, I guess we don't know what Baggermon will or will not do, but the deck's goal of just shitting out level fours and combining them a la um the
Jagras or Skull Knight
yeah,
or Dark Knight. My bad.
just
It's just good.
it's a good deck and it has the memory boost that makes it really well too. That's from
Pride
BT7.
memory
Yeah,
boost.
prideful
Yeah,
memory. Um so it has enough
just
support. Like does it run any high end? I guess is I don't know if it needs to even, you know.
No, it really doesn't. It's like pure aggro. Just because you're just trying to combine stacks. Like you could play a level 6, but like I don't really know what black level 6 would really be worth running. You could probably maybe splash in Metal Garurumon just for some burn. I don't know.
Cause yeah, you top off at Dark Knightmon, right? Level 5. Hmm?
Yeah. You top off on Dark Knightmon and Chimeramon usually just because you're trying to be aggressive. So you're like swing die rebuild, or like that seems to be the way that the deck wants to be played is just
Mm-hmm.
suicide and then rebuild into either of your level 5s and then redo it again.
Yeah, it's just kind of like a token aggro deck of the format. It's not doing the same thing as Armor Rush, but it's doing a similarly minded thing where it's taking cards that are traditionally aggressive and making them sticky because Dark Knight, you're swinging for, I guess, 11,
9k 2 checks.
9k 2 checks. Um, and then if you do die, you just poop out 2 4s that you could then immediately Jogris with. So
And
I
then
see
swing
that.
again.
I think that's
Yeah.
good enough. You know, I really just think that's good enough as far as like an aggro deck's concerned. Um, my only question is it how fast is it compared to Armor Rush? Because that's really its
Uh
direct comparison.
yeah, it's the reason why it's lower is because it is slower. Like the VMON value is just too good, and the fact that you're doing the same thing one stage earlier just makes Armor Rush just way faster.
Mm,
Plus, Armor Rush has a better slew of option selections. Black just doesn't have as good as of aggressive options for you to use. So, like, there is that. On top of the fact that if you do come across a deck that's using red, um, there's a red option that full halts just kills your deck. Period. By saying that you can't play Digimon for free. Well, it's like, oh,
mm-hmm.
now my Skull Knightmon died, and I get absolutely nothing out of it.
Yeah. The only thing that I can see is like again, if we are actually genuinely recommending these decks, is that it's slower than Armor Rush, and I think it's kind of fairly hard countered by both of the fairly relevant removals of the format, either Mega Death or Chaos Degradation. Like returning it to hand or tucking it to security just kind of stops the deck in its tracks.
Yeah, which is why it's like it you have to be really lucky and you have to play as efficiently as you possibly can. Like you could play around some of those cards, and you do have like the monotamons to help try to like set up and do like be a little bit more chip aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
So that way when you make your big turn, you could try to make it as safe as you possibly can. So like there is ways and plays around them. It's just you have to take calculated risks, which is something a lot of aggro decks have to do anyway. So
So
it's slower but more consistent on its damage output than blue hybrid, or not blue hybrids, Armor Rush,
I think
because Armor Rush can't really just shit damage, and this deck can
mm,
more consistently.
I think so like the Jogris turns being the largest point, I guess I'd say. Um Preferably you're not hard playing Dark Nightmons. Um but I guess if you are, I don't like I just think that's a bad turn because it costs so much, and tucking them doesn't give you a whole lot back, as opposed to um, what the hell? What's the purple level 4 that is Rush?
No, so what you do to rebuild your Dark Knight, like you could hard play him, but you really don't need to. You just need to swing with
Swing with
your
the
Skull
Skull
Knight.
Knight, yeah.
Yeah, and then it basically just force rebuilds. So like
Okay.
it's the same thing,
It
just
tucks a deadly
differently.
axe and then digivolves into Dark Knight for 0.
Yeah, and then the fact that you have Cavalier to like potentially give it extra abilities. So you could use Cavalier to digivolve into it and then
Mm-hmm.
go from Cavalier into Dark Knight and retain the jamming and blocker abilities is just absolutely insane.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Um,
It's not great, but like it's still something that adds extra usability to your cards. Because at worst, you could still be like, okay, Cavalier mode on top of a Skull Knight, and now it's swinging for 2 checks, 5K with jamming as a level 4,
mm-hmm.
and then it also has blocker just because.
Gotta go back to BT7 again. What was I gonna say?
Yeah, so like Cavalier mode is what makes the deck kind of similar to Armor Rush, and where it just adds extra usability to your cards to make more aggressive lines of play with. Because before it just didn't have that.
I was going to say something, and I don't remember what I was gonna say anymore. Um, so yeah, I guess your big turn would be digivolving into Skull Knight for 2. You swing. You then, well, you need a Deadly Axemon. You need a Deadly Axemon on the board first, step 1. But you could hard play it to add other thing. It's a Searcher at a level 4, which isn't bad.
Yeah, so like earlier you would want to like you would want to obviously set this turn up.
Mhm.
Have Skull Knight in your raising and then hard play Deadly Axe. So
Mhm.
that way you could easily set it up. You could even think about being aggressive with Deadly Axe, because you could go like hard play Deadly Axe if it lives, then you could go
Oh.
into Cavalier mode, swing with Cavalier mode with jamming, and then swing with the Skull Knight out of raising and fuse that way.
Hmm.
You won't get the buff, but you'll get the other buff. Like
So
it's
I guess I remember what I was gonna say. So like just comparison of aggro decks, especially comparison of underplayed aggro decks. Um, I don't necessarily see the value in this deck. Like I see what it's trying to do, but my initial concern is that I think it's just too weak to all of the current removal options. Like every deck is already teched against it passively, and at the same time, it's not super fast either because you have to play searchers. Like we're talking like not that Jesmon's slow, but like Jesmon levels of slow where you're playing things, you're searching. I don't imagine you run a large amount of tamers, so you're not really going to start with a lot of memory. Um,
well,
but
I mean that's why it's a lower tier deck. Like it's not like a dead in the water. This deck is bad. It's just obviously the good decks already naturally just deal with what it's trying to do, and that's why it's a lower tier deck.
well, I guess that's the line I'm trying to draw is the difference between lower tier decks that deserve to be lower tiered and lower tier decks that potentially are there only because of small inconsistencies and or play rates. Like I don't think Shivaman is that bad. I think Shivaman could be a stronger deck in the right conditions, I guess. Whereas I think this deck is almost dead on arrival. I also
I
not
I
necessarily
don't
trying to
necessarily.
hard pivot, but like the first thing because I was trying to remember what I was thinking about, and I've remembered now. Not trying to hard pivot necessarily because it's a little canned, and I also don't necessarily feel like we need to talk about it either. Um, how is this in any way just better? Because I think this is a worse turn two than Agumon has, just with a starter or the promo Greymon underneath an Agumon. Like that's 2 checks at 7 or 9K. This is 2 checks at 9K, but it requires a level 5 and another level
Well,
4 on board.
that's where Cavalier mode comes in handy because you could basically do that similar line of play just with
It's just
Cavalier
harder
mode.
and slower. You know?
Well,
Like I think
but
Agumons almost just a better aggro deck than that. and it's
So
also not good.
the thing is, like, we have the ability to like also give it reboot to basically make it a reboot blocker, and it dealt damage. Like there's various other tech and tools that you could do,
What
not like trying
gives
to defend the deck,
what gives it
but
reboot?
like
I didn't see that.
Toyagumon.
Oh, okay, that's fair. Do you run? I guess you run some amount
Yeah,
level
you
threes.
would run Toy Agumons and then the Monotamons just because there's no other really good level 3 inheritable that you're
Hmm.
trying to use. Black has like awful level 3 inheritables. It's actually
Plus,
kind of laughable.
plus black has some really good level three inheritables. What do you mean?
Yeah, if you're playing into an archetype, if you're not trying to play into an
Toyagumon's a
archetype,
great card.
yes,
I know it's
it's
like the
like the
only
only good
one.
usable one. Yeah,
Don't everyone
like it's
sleeps on my
especially
boy
for like an aggro.
Junkmon.
Yeah, Junkmon's actually decent. I
I
like
think
Junkmon,
Junkmon's good
but
in an aggro deck.
I mean, you could even play Junkmon in this, and like when Dark Knightmon dies, passively gain a memory. Like that's not
BT6
awful.
Toyagumon.
You're not. No, we're not trying to go for the extra DP because we have the ability to give it jamming. But like the whole point is you're basically a more consistent and stickier aggro deck. So it's just like it is easier to kill a Greymon than it is to kill a Dark Knightmon. And that's the strength of the deck is the fact that it is harder to just kill. But granted, yes, against the top tier like um against Chaos Degradation and Megadeth, like yeah, there is not a lot of outs, but like most decks already don't have a whole lot of outs to those anyway.
So I couldn't the Dark Knight deck adopt the Caramon package? I mean, not the whole line, but like, aren't their
Yes,
names treated as the same? So you could use EX1 Caramon for each other Digimon with this name. It gets plus 1,000 DP.
yeah.
Or when you
Like you don't
play,
have to strictly just run the Monotamons. Like you could
oh, I
do
know.
other things.
I was just saying like because they run this, like their names are treated. It's
Yes.
yeah,
So
that would
you
work.
can run some of the Diaboromon stuff in Skull Knightmon in terms of the level threes to, do various other things
Hmm.
because Cavalier mode is treated as both. So it does also count as a Deadly Axemon and a Nightmon or Skull Knightmon. So if you separate and end up with a Skull Knightmon and a Cavalier mode, like you could still get lots of additional value for using Diaboromon stuff. Like that's what I'm trying to say is like you still have lots of like even though it's not going to be like tier 0 hyper like must play meta competitive, it's not a bad deck by any stretch of the word and there's a lot of creativity that could be had going into building the deck that could really make it quite a force to be reckoned with and a surprise to a lot of people.
That's fair. I don't know. I
Like that's
guess
my angle on a lot of these
as
decks.
long
Like
as you're
Cherubimon's also
actually,
like that.
as long as you're procking the, you're not having to hard play Deadly Knight. You're seeing your pieces. You're given the ability to set up without getting knocked down or losing before you get knocked down. Um, I do think Skull Knight Cavalier adds enough because you're only digivolving for one, and if you're digivolving over a level 3, you can then use it as the um activator for Deadly Axemon because its name is treated as the other one. It doesn't give anything, but it at least activates the ability so that you can swing and tuck and then digivolve for free.
Like, yeah, it's not a bad deck by any means.
No,
It's
I don't hate it as
yeah.
much as I did after looking at it. Um, I
I
don't.
mean, kind of like Cherubimon. Like Cherubimon, I thought was like this deck is just weird, and then the yellow Cherubimon, it's just like oh this card's just bad, and I'm like eh. The more I thought about it, it's not that bad. The new yellow Cherubimon
I just don't
because
think
like
it's what the
Cherubimon
deck
is kind
wants.
of it is and it isn't like it just wants an easy way to kill it, but like we've had
It
this
already has the ability to kill it, and I also, you only run like, I guess it's kind of debatable whether you run 3 or 4 Cherubi. Um, I know some people were even running Anubis. as like an off mega, but um, at least the build that I was using, you were really low to the ground. Um, you really only wanted the Cherubi after you've chipped with hybrids just to shit out a couple rookies and end the game. Um, so the entire idea of having more megas that give security attack minus like eh, especially because Jokris just gets around that. So
I mean, you don't necessarily care about the security tech minus. You care about the fact that you are basically replacing the body while triggering the on delete ability. That's my perspective. Because, like, I'm looking at a lot of the cards, and I don't think Cherubimon changes that hardcore from what we were doing in BT7.
I
Um,
don't think you play Cherubimon in BT8. I'll go
you
there.
you still can.
I think well,
Um,
so it's something I wanted to mention way back, like before we even started recording, when we were still like doing the prep stuff. So just looking at this tier list, um, a lot of the stuff that I see here could be clear. Like there's a lot of like soaking and um, meta shifting that I think happens. So I know like DPP's list includes security control. I don't think there are any actual security control players left because even if you want to play that deck, you're not playing security control in its previous construction, in its previous name. You're playing a very control heavy Mastamon list, or you're running hybrid control or yellow hybrid control, or you're running BL Star. Like there are other ways to play security control without playing security control to the point where I don't think anyone's actually playing security control anymore. Just like I don't think now the inclusions, you have the Dark Knight deck, you have the Armor Rush deck, you have Agubond, Gabubond. I don't think anyone's playing pure Rookie Rush anymore. Like the deck has almost evolved and like we're now seeing the next step in the evolution chain.
No, I agree with that, and I like I still think there's certain viability in decks. So like I don't necessarily think that Cherubimon as a deck is like completely dead in the water. Yes, he's not going to be played. No, he doesn't get a whole lot of like actually like good and meaningful updates. Um but like I don't think he's like something that egregiously bad where he just should not exist in the meta period. Like there's still a
No.
spot for
I
him.
I
And
mean
there's still like room for experimentation because of his ability to just pump out any color of Digimon. It frees up you to use lots of different things on top of his new like all of the new yellow purple synergies that you could also start trying to take advantage of a little bit more. I think he is kind of in that spot where it's an adapt or die, similar to Lilith Loop, a little bit less so, just because you already had the purple hybrid stuff that's still going to be just as good as it was. It's just with more tamer hate and ways to actually deal with tamers. Yes, it is a little bit less viable.
I
But but
yeah.
Cherubimon still is one of the few purple decks that actually has true access to everything in its trash. Not all purple decks have that. And I think that's a huge strength that people could play into Cherubimon is like, I can use literally every single card in my trash. My trash is the most meaningful in this deck versus any other deck it's ever been. Just because you have that.
I just think it's not necessarily that it shouldn't see play or that it's that bad. You're right. Like I guess it's more in line with what I was thinking with Dark Knightmon, but not necessarily in the same direction. I think the Dark Knight deck is just too slow for what it wants to do. I know like that doesn't mean it doesn't get to be, but again, really, we're kind of talking competitive here. Like I I don't necessarily just see a world where someone improves Cherubi and like because there's not necessarily any surprise of playing an old deck in a current format as much because I don't think it's changed significantly enough. Like if someone
Well, I
pulls
mean,
out Yellow Lord Nightmon Jogress, all of their previous experience against Yellow Lord Nightmon and BT5 is more or less irrelevant. They're relearning their opponent's deck as they're playing against it. I don't think that's true with yellow with purple to ruby.
I would agree. But like if going from a hardcore competitive stance, it's just like the top decks are top decks for a reason. They're going to be, no matter what you're playing against, very hard to deal with, and that's why everyone's going to be playing them. And like Americans specifically love to feed into subconsciously the self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, oh, blue hybrids was just such a menace. So what does everyone do? Start playing blue hybrids because it was just such a menace. It's like, oh, how do you beat it? Yellow hybrids? Well, yellow hybrids obviously is not the answer. Um, like I think people just didn't really learn how to like break down that matchup. Going off on a little tangent here, sorry about that. But like I just don't think that people want to put that time and effort to really understand how to beat those specific matchups. And like these underrepresented decks sometimes do have that ability. It's like, oh, what is blue hybrid's big weakness? Damage out of nowhere. What decks do that really well? Cherubimon does that fantastically well. Lilithloop, at least in BT7, did that fantastically well. Yellow Hybrids did not do that very well. Obviously, one of the worst decks to play against it. It's just stalling out, and that's your only real win condition is just to stall out. So like it's gonna basically just be a rinse and repeat. It's just now we have different decks that we need to understand what their strengths and weaknesses are. And sometimes these unexpected decks could, you know, surprise people on having the answer that they don't even know exists because they're not bothering with that.
I I agree with that sentiment. I just think the idea that especially purple to ruby is so recent, like people aren't going to struggle to remember what it's like to play against purple to ruby in BT8, having it just been a fairly highly played meta deck in BT7. And it doesn't really get a whole lot better, and a lot of the decks can beat it more passively with BT or with its biggest weakness being if you just tuck to ruby, if you just remove and also like I guess the thing I disagree with most is it's winning out of nowhere. It doesn't really win out of nowhere because just like blue hybrid, there's a defined amount of attacks. You just have to be aware of how many bushy Agumon are in um your trash, you know. So
Well, I mean, that's the same with Lilithloop. Like, just uninteractable damage is what Blue Hybrid struggled with. It's just like any deck that could just be like, and now here's extra bodies that also just so happen can attack, is how Blue Hybrids generally loses, especially if there's a memory blocking tamer on the field. Their security is so bad, it's like laughable. It's like, okay, big stack deck, all a big stack deck has to do is just dodge Tommy, and then it just wins. Like it just has a hard time at trying to um protect itself in a sense, and it's just trying to rely on the opponent just having cards on the field to stun it, and that's how blue hybrid got its value. um and I think like obviously with the introduction of Jagras, now we actually have ways to play around it. So now blue hybrids is going to take a huge hit, even, and it's not getting that many updates um to really keep itself any stronger than what it currently is.
yeah. Um. So I know. Because I saw it mentioned a little bit. Because I know Carta has already announced that unless there are any further delays, BT Carta's May 29th, I believe, May 28th,
Yeah, the end of May.
the end of May, regional will be BT8. Um, which people are saying like, oh, like, is it just going to be decided on who gets their stuff first or who can build their full deck in a week? Or I mean, depending on if you count, I count pre-release, which is because I think it's a little disingenuous to say, oh, it won't even be out for 24 hours before the tournament because that's just not true. Because you get access to the cards as of pre-release, and I don't think my store is in the minority where they allow you to then purchase pre-ordered product as of the pre-release because they aren't legal until the following Friday. Um, for so like technically that the pre-release is Saturdays and Sunday, then any Tuesday or Wednesday tournaments are still technically BT7. But I'm pretty sure most people at that point will show up to tournaments being like, "Hey, do you have any BT8? Cool, can we play BT8?" Like at the local level, especially. Um, so it's a little disingenuous to say that you'll only have 24 hours to get the product. You'll have a week to get the product, which is for anyone trying to deal with an online retailer still a stretch, still a rush. But um, Blue Hybrids is still going to be a very competitive deck, especially if you're good at it. If you bring Blue Hybrid to um, like the May 29th Carta tournament because you don't have any access to BT8, I don't think you're going to be that actively inhibited by it, especially because a lot of the decks aren't running the same tools that you're used to running. You're not your worst matchup won't be yourself anymore necessarily, and Jokris putting out a bunch of low um, inheritable bodies does make Blue Hybrid a little bit better. I think their matchup into the Mastamon deck's a little worse. I don't think the Mastamon deck loses to itself as much as Yellow Hybrids did. It kind of wants to actually play the game a little bit more, but more or less, especially if you're someone who's done well with it. Like I know our teammate David Lago won two back-to-back events with Blue Hybrid. I don't think he'll be playing Blue Hybrid in that event if he's playing in that event, but I think he could still win that event if he brought Blue Hybrid to that event. I think that's how good Blue Hybrid still is if you want to
Uh,
play it.
Yeah, Blue Hybrids is still a very strong deck, and I think like Blue Hybrid's worst matchup is Imperial, just because the unstoppable damage that Imperial can do. But Imperial really has to like watch out their memory count on when they can do stuff because like a missed Hammer Spark could really ruin their day, and they don't have a counter to Hammer Spark. They're
Hmm.
not running
They're not
Madoki. They're
running.
not running Siako.
Yeah.
So like you're going to be able to play your full blue hybrid deck the way it wants to be played. And against decks like whatchamacallit, Black War Greymon, if they have a hard time building up a good stack with Black War Greymon, you just tear it down and then that Black War Greymon is like every other level 6. It just doesn't really do anything. The only difference is you do kind of have to watch out on what tamers you're playing, so that way you don't get blown out with them killing, let's just say, a Tommy and a Madoki Betamon.
Mm.
Like that would be absolutely devastating. Um, but that just goes into smart play. So like Blue Hybrids is still going to be a very strong deck. It's just like you said, you do have to just play wisely.
So I don't really have a name for the rest of this. I also don't really think we have time to discuss. At this point, I guess I'm including like BT8 techable jank. I don't necessarily want to say jank because I focused jank. BT8 has a lot of flexible cards in it, especially when it comes to decks that have access to Jogress, decks that have access to various methods of producing efficient Digimon or shifting gears, um, potentially from one color to another, depending on what you're running for megas. And I think any combination of those is something that could still be like the combined dark horse of the meta.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. BT8 is just an insanely flexible set, just because it offers a lot of tools that multiple colors and multiple color combinations can use. And that's kind of like the big takeaway is like the that increased level of flexibility and usability could make something somebody hasn't even seen before come out of the woodworks and just start doing uh crazy things and you wouldn't even know it.
Yeah, decks that don't necessarily need a clearly defined Digimon line or a clearly defined color pair. I guess color pairing it kind of needs, but like so black, red, black war, Greymon. The deck builds itself more or less. It has a lot more tools in its arsenal due to the Greymon synergies, but you're really kind of in one direction. X Antibody, same thing. Imperial German, they all want to play one
Their
thing,
cards. Yeah,
and
they want
then
to play their
but
cards.
you also have yellow blue things, yellow blue stuff. You have yellow red stuff. Um, I you technically have Tyrannomon, but that's probably just bad. Um,
Tyrannomon aggro is it is just a worse version of Dark Knightmon with less protection. Like it's trying to be more cheeky and cute. I think the green version is really bad, like really, really bad. The red version is at least a little bit more playable.
but so I guess this would be encompassing yellow, blue, and yellow red, as far as I'm concerned. Both decks have a lot of options. I've gone back and forth on different lists for both, and what I would want to see in both decks. Technically, both of them using yellow as a base allows them to use. They could flex into Magnamon if they want to. They could flex into Rapidmon if they want to. Um, they have access to Shakumon for Jogress, or they have access to what's the other one? Sylphimon. So,
Well, right now, just blue and yellow both just have the most access to the most Jagresses and
mhm.
the most color combinations based on what we already have. It's like blue red doesn't really exist outside of two cards, and they're not even like really good two color
No, I,
cards.
I don't think blue red's a deck. So,
I'm just saying as an
yeah.
example, like blue and yellow are the colors where you have a lot of like flexibility in terms of how many tech and tools you have access to on top of purple. I think purple is like also insane just because of the high levels of synergy its cards already had. Especially now that it has purple yellow cards to be playing around with, just even past the Mastamon stuff.
So, just the idea that there are a decent amount of decks you can play this format. I think the tier 1 decks, we'll see what people actually play, but I think we will have the most competitive tier 1 like matchup of any meta we've seen prior. I don't think so blue green imperial does seem to be like the deck to beat. We'll see if we're right this time. We were wrong with yellow hybrid last format as the initial deck to beat.
Well, I think the two starter decks, Mastimon and Imperial, are both equally as threatening. I would say Imperial can win faster than Mastimon, but I think Mastimon's like control and tools is like absolutely insane.
But so, and I think yeah, just the inclusion of two colors in general really gives a substantial level of flexibility in Chimeramon, enabling a ton of different strategies. So
That card's so good.
I don't have anything else, I guess I want to say as far as different underrepresented decks or decks that I would like to see more play than they probably will.
I mean, my big takeaway is like there's a lot of decks in Digimon that are playable. Some more than others in given metas, yes, but like the experimentation should not be stopping. And I feel like a lot of the time we get to a state where we're complacent with the meta and we stop experimenting when there's still just so many other things that we could try to like mess around with. And a lot of these underrepresented decks are in that zone where it's just like they don't know you don't know what extent that these decks can do and how these decks can really like function in the grand scheme of the meta because they're so underrepresented. Like nobody's really talking about them, so they just kind of die off. And then all we're left with is just, oh, here's tier one deck right here that is the deck to beat. So let's just all try to be that deck or be the next best deck that has a good matchup against it. Like the experimentation is a big factor in card games, and I feel like we don't have a lot of it or as much as we should.
Yeah. Um so BT8 will matter more than BT7 as of the announcement of the regionals. So BT8 will be the first decks that people will now pilot to qualify for nationals. Um and we'll see how much that really shakes out. Um I yeah, the ultimate conclusion of BT7 being Blue Hybrids is the best deck. I still wouldn't quantify it as a tier 0 deck. It was just a very highly played tier 1 deck. Uh, haven't run any real hard numbers because I haven't really cared to. I don't know if it ever passed Lord Nightmon as far as deck playability is concerned. I know,
I believe it did. I firmly think that it did at this point. Um,
yeah, especially at
my
I
take,
guess toppings.
yeah, I think like blue hybrids is definitely a lot more skill intensive than people like to give it credit for. Um, and I think like obviously the good players having lots of skill know how to use that skill effectively, and blue hybrids is a deck that lets them use it effectively enough to have overwhelmingly large amount of toppings and winnings.
So BT8, I don't think that will be as the case, and I think the biggest case for that being the the floodgates. I think the floodgates were way more impactful than people initially let on, because as I kind of more or less developed from playing against a lot of blue hybrid without having playing blue hybrid myself, is that we're almost playing two different games, which would potentially move blue hybrids more into that tier 0 territory, but it was just availability. Blue hybrids could very easily splash in um, memory gaining cards, punishment security memory cards in the form of Hammer Spark and Ice Wall. Still had that danger of tamers, and all of that combined with its consistency of searching with on plays, that it was just playing by different rules. Purple hybrids were rarely like I couldn't cycle our level fours as much. We also had just fewer level fours in general because we only had two level four hybrid lines that we could run. Cherubimon had to die. You needed to see Cherubimon to win a Cherubimon deck versus blue hybrids could just run a bunch of level fours, and if they saw a level five, they could cycle those level fours. And they also had both floodgates out so that you couldn't reduce your costs or gain memory. And if they weren't playing in the mirror, they still could. So
I think for the meta, it was just a really overtuned deck. Um, and obviously, it could still be beaten, and it still has been beaten. It was just a really overtuned deck, and in the hands of a good player, it could take that player very, very far, which it did. But with BT8, it definitely is looking like it's going to be a lot healthier of a meta. There is definitely a lot more decks that not only could be played, but are probably going to be played. Uh, Different offshoots on decks, and I think the starter decks are going to be absolutely insane for a lot of newcomers picking up the game, just because that is one of the easiest, most competitive things that they could buy. Is like, let me just pick up the starter deck, and I'm already one step closer to a tier one deck without really needing to do much effort. Which is kind of crazy to think that starter decks were that good or are that good, but that's just the way that the meta is, and there's still just a lot of different things that we could do just because of two colors. So I'm extremely optimistic that BT8 is going to be a really fun format.
I believe that's all the time we have. So with that, I'll close out this week's episode. Goodbye.
Bye.